author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
As the balance of power shifts somewhat in American politics, it's time to start questioning how that power, borrowed from citizens and utilized by the elected, will be wielded. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's episode, we discuss the GOP blitz against Joe Biden, silver linings for Republicans, FTX and the cost of Thanksgiving. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. With the GOP now in control of the House, certain representatives have come out of the gate with a shocking presser, in which GOP big dogs Jim Jordan and James Comer set out a roadmap for investigating both Hunter Biden and, more importantly, President Joe Biden. So to discuss the latest, we're joined by Liberty Nation's editor-in-chief, Ms. Lisa K. Donner. Thanks for being here, Lisa.
Good to be here, Mark.
So I have to say, I was blown away by the audacity of the press conference, the details, the accusations, and perhaps more so how these two representatives, they seemed ready to pounce just one day after the GOP secured the magic 218 seats. Now, in a moment, we're going to listen to a couple of parts of that presser. But what were your initial impressions?
Wow, talk about scorched earth. It was as if the Republicans were just waiting till that 218 magic number came, and they came out with guns ablaze. This is nothing short of major news, and they were clear. They're not just going after Hunter Biden; they're going after the President of the United States.
Yeah, that was very much apparent, and they were very open about that as well, saying this is, I believe there was a part where James Comer said, we don't need to discuss whether Hunter Biden is a lowlife. He is what he said, but this is about Joe Biden. Now, we're going to play a quick clip here for you, Lisa, and I'd like you to come back in on that with your reaction.
Rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse will be the primary goal of a Republican House Oversight Committee. As such, this investigation will be a top priority. We are releasing a report today that details what we have uncovered. We are also sending letters to the Biden administration officials and Biden family associates renewing our request for voluntary production of documents relevant to this investigation. This is an investigation of Joe Biden, the President of the United States, and why he lied to the American people about his knowledge and participation in his family's international business schemes. National security interests require the committee conduct investigation, and we will pursue all avenues that have long been ignored. Committee Republicans have uncovered evidence of federal crimes committed by and to the benefit of members of the president's family. These include conspiracy or defrauding the United States, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, violations of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit money laundering.
May I say, wow. I mean, talk about throwing the book at someone. The Republicans clearly were ready for this. They had visual aids behind them. They had lots of information. You know, the key words that Democrats have been using for a while now, at least when Donald Trump was president and after, was Republicans claim without evidence, or people claim without evidence. Using those words, claim without evidence. Well, they came to the table with plenty of evidence there. Whether it'll stick or not, of course, we don't know. But there's a lot of allegations, and they had a roadmap. They really did have a roadmap for investigating the Biden family schemes.
Yeah, I think what was most impressive, if I may use that term, was that they highlighted, here is the information that we have, and also pointed out, here's why you haven't heard from it before. Here's where the information was sent to. Here's who debunked it and why no follow-up was done on it.
Well, I do want to put just one thought in, and that is Miranda Devine over at the New York Post must be just opening bottle after bottle of champagne today. She has been pounding this drum now for, I don't know, has it been 2 years, Mark? I mean, it seems like a long time.
It absolutely has been 2 years, because the Hunter Biden laptop story came out not long before the 2020 election.
Right,
And
right.
it's
And then
probably
that was
worth.
suppressed.
It was.
And then everyone said it was fake, including 51 national security people, which they label today the essence of Russian disinformation campaigns. But it's really been interesting to watch how this has turned. Then the establishment media came out, I'd say, in about the last year, and started saying, well, it does look like Hunter Laptops really is Hunter's laptop.
Yeah, well, there was a progression, wasn't there? First of all, it wasn't Hunter's laptop. Then it was Hunter's laptop, but it was Russian disinformation. Then it was Hunter's laptop and it was Russian disinformation with added things in there to make the Biden family look bad. And then it's basically just Hunter Biden's laptop. And it is what it is.
Let me tell you, if they're trying to say that, all of this is just hokum and made up, that's pretty extensive. As there's just no way that can be.
Now, one thing I noticed, Lisa, and I did mention this to you at the time the press was going on, and shortly after, while Fox News covered the presser, of course, many other major, let's call them left-leaning outlets, did not cover the presser, and neither did they have stories up straight away or within a particularly reasonable time to explain what had happened. Now, to me, this just seems a massive continuation of the same suppression that took place with Hunter Biden's laptop, isn't it?
This kind of gatekeeping has got to stop. But I'll tell you also, this is why places like Liberty Nation exist. Because you have to have places that are going to give you what's really going on and aren't constantly gatekeeping. I mean, talk about errors of omission. This is a major, major investigation of the current president of the United States. Now, certainly when they were investigating, and the Democrats were investigating Donald Trump, it was all over every station. Why isn't it now?
Well, perhaps it will be labeled as it was a fake press conference filled with, put together by the Kremlin to discredit Joe Biden off the wave of his midterm success. Yeah, it seems to me that they are doing this gatekeeping exactly as you say. And what's happening is the reason for the delay was to come together with a narrative that could be firmly pushed across all of the more Democrat-friendly networks, because obviously you can't have people going off half-cocked, as we say in the UK, and actually just printing what actually happened, because that would be reckless journalism, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I was interested in their accusation on abuse of power. And that's why I thought what they were talking about, the suspicious activity reports. And I think you have something on that.
Well, listen to this and let me know what you think.
Many transactions related to these businesses have raised red flags at U.S. banks. A suspicious activity report, or SAR, is a document a bank must file with the Treasury Department when a transaction is suspected to be related to money laundering or fraud or other types of criminal activity. According to media reports, the Biden family accumulated over 150 SARs. One SAR generated by an American bank to the Treasury Department connects Hunter Biden and his business associates to international human trafficking, among other illegal activities.
The thing that I found most interesting about this whole SARS situation, Mark, was that, okay, the Biden family accumulated 150 of them, and then they stopped. Well, why did they stop?
Yeah, that is the most fascinating part. Do you want to give the game away there, Lisa?
No, go ahead. Tell our listeners.
Right. So these are SARS, not the respiratory disorder famous in Japan, but the ones to do with financial transactions.
Suspicious activity reports.
A lot of people get these when they transfer large sums of money. It's having one or two or five or six. It's not cause for concern. It's just to red flag something. Well,
how about 150?
Well, that's the difference, right? But then, of course, we say it's 150. We think, well, that's quite a lot. But then you think, what happened? Well, President Biden, according to Representative Comer, changed the rules. on how these things are reported, meaning that the Biden family had no more SARS being recorded about their transactions. And I think Representative Comey also pointed out about Maxine Waters, a Democrat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maxine Waters, said, why has this been changed? And I guess somebody had to say, shh, that's our side. We've decided to change the reporting on suspicious activities reports. But, it's like, I found that really shocking, especially considering their alleging abuse of power. And if he did, in fact, change that after he was president for personal reasons, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's going to be quite amazing to see what comes down the line, Lisa. Now, final question for you, how long before the Democratic Party starts unraveling and pulling out its hair at this?
Well, this is, going to be interesting to watch. And I think it's safe to say there's a little schadenfreude going on there, and Republicans are glad to see the shoes on the other foot. But, this is what happens when you take the House of Representatives in the United States of America. And the GOP is putting Joe Biden and his family on notice.
Lisa K. Donna, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
After this short break, we'll be back discussing silver linings for the GOP after a mixed result midterm. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
With the GOP winning the House but losing the Senate, and a fairly lackluster performance in the midterm elections, there's a fair amount of despondency upon the political right. And with that, naturally, more than a couple of recriminations. But is it all doom and gloom, or are there some silver linings, perhaps? Well, to help us figure that out, we're joined by longtime host of this here Liberty Nation radio show, and LN's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner, who wrote a stupendous article on this topic recently. Thanks for joining us, Tim. Let's talk about what's happened then. It's not all thunderbolts and lightning for the GOP, is it?
Well, look, let's get down to the basics now that Republicans and frankly even Democrats have gotten over the shock of what happened. And I'd like to say on November 8th, but it's a concluding or reaching its pinnacle on November 8th, because we don't have election days anymore. We have election seasons. Some states began as early as September voting. How else would you explain John Fetterman, who can't even put a sentence together, getting elected? But I digress. I think now that we have this election in the rearview mirror and already looking forward to 2024, now that Donald Trump is officially in the race, it's important to note that conservatives got greedy in thinking, well, of course, we're going to take the House. It's a matter of how many seats, and looks more and more like we're going to take the Senate. And look, Real Clear Politics even predicted that the GOP would pick up 3 seats, and they are truly impartial analysts that go through all the polls. So this was a shocking outcome. But through it all, we have to remember that there was only one thing that was absolutely critical, that the Republicans absolutely, totally, positively had to do, and that was to take control of the gavel in the House, even though they'll have a very slim majority, maybe the slimmest in decades. Probably.
Yeah, I mean, Nancy Pelosi managed two years with just a majority of 5.
That's true. Well, the important thing, of course, is that the Republicans get to set the agenda and chair the committees and conduct the investigations. So let's start with that baseline that they had to win the House. And because conservatives started becoming overly ambitious, not all of them, but most of them, including the pollsters, and Democrats who appeared despondent, they did win the House. And the reason that's important is, the investigations, the agenda, but most of all, they can now stop the insane progressive agenda of Joe Biden and the Democrats. They're not going to be able to get anything through. We're going to have 2 years of gridlock. And as far as the Republicans are concerned, that's exactly what they want. So they get another shot at the White House in 2024. So that, combined with the fact, look, they lost the Senate, but that does not affect their ability to stop Biden's agenda. It only means that they can't stop his judicial appointments and they can't stop Senate investigations run by the Democrats, but it does not affect their ability to stop cold, build back better, and the like that the Democrats foist on the American people.
I think what we might see is that long-promised unity from Joe Biden, because
because he has to.
He has to. Yeah. Now he pointed out the other day that he would be willing to work with anybody who's willing to work with him. But what he really meant, if you listen to the words that he said and then looked at his caveats that he included, is that as long as they're on the principles that I want to do, that it doesn't impact reproductive rights, that it doesn't impact our climate agenda plans. And I think he's setting himself up for a major failure here.
Well, I think the way he may be setting himself up for failure is by being all giddy about these midterm results, as if it was a mandate for him to continue his left-wing agenda. If he interprets it as that, then yes, he's going to be in big trouble, because in no way was this a rubber stamp by the voters of the Build Back Better mentality. But I think there's also some other things that happen that are encouraging for the Republicans. I mean, Florida is now Alabama politically for the Republicans. They absolutely dominate the state. DeSantis won by almost 20 points. He was expected to win by maybe a dozen, but he won by almost double that, together with Marco Rubio's victory re-election to the Senate. Florida has become ruby red and has produced a future star. He's a star already for the GOP, but he's going to be a future star in the presidential stakes, whether it's 2024, 2028, and that, of course, is Ron DeSantis. So they have a base. And here's the thing that's probably the most encouraging for Republicans over the long haul. They also made some gains in New York, which is important. The Democrats had the worst victory in New York that you could possibly have. Hochul barely hung on to win a first full term as governor. But beyond New York, with Florida now in the bank for Republicans, and Ohio also now in the bank for Republicans, the governor there, Mike DeWine, won by 25 points. Even J.D. Vance, controversial Trump-backed candidate, won by 7. You add the 47 electoral votes of Ohio and Florida to the 40 of Texas, and all of a sudden, the Republicans have a solid red troika of 87 electoral votes, which is not the 101 that Democrats have in California, New York, and Illinois, but it comes awfully close. So the electoral map has sort of under the radar really solidified for Republicans for 2024.
Middle America becomes a battleground once again.
Yes,
Tim Donner. We're talking silver linings with Tim Donner for the GOP. We're going to be right back after this short break, discussing what comes next for American politics. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
With Thanksgiving just around the corner, there's no better time to do a year-by-year comparison on just how well Bidenomics is treating the average family. And with us to provide the numbers, the pork, and perhaps the turkey is Liberty Nation's economics correspondent, Mr. Andrew Moran. Welcome back, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. It's been a while.
It has. We're glad to have you back on. We assumed that we wouldn't need you anymore because Joe Biden assured us that the economy was going from strength to strength. But it appears that's not quite true. Is it, Andrew?
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, if you look at every single metric, aside from the labor market, of course, it's just everything is on a downhill. The PMIs are contracting, inflation's still elevated. Companies are their forward guidance is dreadful. The stock market is still in a bear market. So yeah, I mean, every single component of the U.S. economy isn't that great right now, and recession is almost guaranteed at this point. A second one anyway.
So yeah, of course, they could deny the second one as easily as they denied the first one. So let's talk turkey, quite literally, Andrew. Let's talk turkey. Thanksgiving dinner is coming up, and I know for many of our listeners who don't opt for the tofurkey version, this could be quite an expensive time of year. What are the details?
Yeah, so well, the price of the centerpiece itself, turkey. I mean, it's at an all-time high right now. You look at the numbers. I think it's up 21% from a year ago. The cost of a 16-pound bird is $28.96, or if you do the math, and I'm terrible at math, it's $1.81 per pound.
Says the Economist.
And the overall Thanksgiving feast, according to the American Farm Bureau, is up 20% from a year ago. So overall, I mean, this Thanksgiving is going to be absolutely expensive for anyone. If you look at some of the surveys, they show a quarter of Americans are just giving up Thanksgiving. They're not going to do anything this year because of how expensive it is. And it's not just a turkey. I mean, look at everything around. Look at the price of eggs as a good example of that. Up 40% year over year just a month ago. That was incredible. The price of bread's up 15% from a year ago. Corn, peas, carrots, ham, everything is just up across the board at Thanksgiving feast. And then if you want to go see your in-laws, you're spending, 20% more in gasoline from a year ago. So
I mean, that is the best excuse ever, right? Sorry, in-laws. Exactly. We shan't be there this year. Gas is far too pricey. Now, let's not lay all the blame at the feet of the present economy. There is surely the bird flu that's sweeping the world has impacted the price of the bird anyway, specifically, hasn't it?
Yeah, the bird flu. I mean, it's amazing. Usually, the bird flu is around for the colder months, January, February, March. But this year, the farmers have been noticing that the bird flu actually seeped in July, and July is a critical period for these farmers because that's when they start raising the flock for the Thanksgiving sales. So yeah, the bird flu. It's not just happening in the United States; it's happening in Canada, the UK, Asia, all these different places, and that's adding fuel to this whole turkey inflation. But it's also, again, it's not just bird flu. You have soaring diesel prices, soaring labor costs, and labor shortages, the war in Ukraine, droughts. So I think it was NPR that said it sounds like biblical revelations considering what's happening in the turkey market.
Yeah, I've tended to ignore NPR in recent years after they start using far too many adjectives to describe political leaders on the right, and I think that's conduct unbecoming, considering they take taxpayer dollars. Now let's discuss something a little bit different here, but still on the same topic. So, if inflation goes up or down in the near future, are we going to be stuck with these high prices? And as in, once the market learns that a certain percentage of people is or are still willing to pay the higher prices, what incentives do producers have to drop back, do you think?
Well, first of all, I mean, when it comes to inflation, it's sticky. I mean, if you look at the year-over-year growth of 7.7%, that's the baseline from a year ago. But it doesn't mean that prices are going to start falling. If something goes up 7% or 8%, it's going to stay there for a while. It's not going to come down to where it was, pre-pandemic or 1980. And then if you on top of that, your purchasing power has been completely eviscerated with all the money printing that's been going on. When it comes to producers scaling back their output, if prices are as high as they are, they're going to continue to try to take advantage of those higher prices. But the problem is that if they try to take advantage of higher prices, they have to do with all these other overhead costs. Labor is one of the biggest things right now occurring. Energy for farmers, fertilizer is trading at all-time highs or near all-time highs now. Anyway, diesel is at $5.40 a gallon. National average, of course, probably higher in a lot of other places. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place where they want to profit off of these near all-time high prices, but then investing it to do that is a risky gamble, because what will happen suddenly if prices collapse? Then they have all this investments going down the tubes. That's one of the issues with the oil market today. One of the reasons, not the only one, but one of them, is that oil producers, they're terrified of investing more in case the WTI prices collapse before it be below $80, $70, or $60 a barrel, which makes it, because it makes it harder to break even. And then, of course, in addition to that, you have the regulatory uncertainty from the current Biden administration.
I may be wrong here, Andrew, and my understanding of economics and global power systems is not complete, but it seems that when Joe Biden says that these oil producers and these manufacturing companies that are charging the higher prices, it's not as he says, that it's all because of greed. There's a certain amount of self-protection involved there, right?
Oh God, it's so frustrating when because it's not just I mean this is the doctrine of the left or the progressivism itself. They think that one, that profit is bad, two, profit is driving higher prices. But that's not the case when it comes to crude oil. And now that we've transitioned to that subject, when we're talking about crude oil, it's the petroleum financial markets that drive the cost of WTI, Brent, natural gas, whatever the case. It's not so much Chevron, posting record profits in its previous quarter, and that's what's completely frustrating. I mean, it sounds on the surface that perhaps he's right, but if you understand economics and how the financial markets work, you see he's just completely lying about it, or perhaps he's not lying; he's just oblivious and ignorant to what's occurring in the broader economic conditions.
I think you'd find a 50-50 split on where that is. I don't think there's anybody saying he's actually right. No, there are some people within the fourth estate saying he's correct. Now, let's jump. Let's stick with Joe Biden for a minute. Now, how is Biden's international largesse? Now, I'm sure you know what I'm referring to here. $20 billion. That's billion with a B. Of taxpayer money, much of it from the US, not all of it, to wean Indonesia off coal or off fossil fuels. I mean, firstly, Andrew, how is that impacting long-term economic outlook for the United States? Number two, how can he even justify sending taxpayer money to do climate action in Indonesia? I'm sure the Indonesian people, I'm sure, are wonderful, but really?
Yeah, I first heard of the story actually on LibertyNation.com on the headlines, and I was baffled by it. $20 billion to one country for green energy. What the heck is that? And then you dive deeper into it, and I reported on it for LibertyNation.com and went into more detail. And yeah, so it's the United States and the G7 partners, and they're giving Indonesia $20 billion to wean off coal and go into green energy, geothermal, solar, all that stuff. But it's so funny because Indonesia, its representation of global emissions is about between 1 and 1.4%. And if you compare that to China, the US represent about half of all international emissions. But this is the latest scheme. I mean, you can fault a poor country like Indonesia or any other nations that are currently negotiating with the G7 and the United Nations and all these Western countries that want to just hand out taxpayer dollars. If you pledge to be a green country, if you're just saying, hey, yeah, of course, we want to get off fossil fuels and have solar panels everywhere, but you give us money, of course you're going to do that. You can't blame them at all for getting $20 billion
for a poorer or developing country, as they're called. Of course, they'll take it.
But what's funny too is that Jakarta's goal is to go zero emission economy by 2050. So we got $20 billion now or over the next 5 years for something that might be attained in 2050. So I find that comical. I mean, all these countries are going to do it. And because these Western countries are so desperate to hand out money, the terms and conditions of a lot of these agreements, especially on when it comes to the financing side, they're all going to benefit these countries. They're all going to want, one of the issues that the Indonesian government had was that they wanted far lower interest rates. And guess what? The G7 just gave it to them. So I don't know the specific number, but the president was celebrating that he got lower interest rates.
It's easy to be generous when it's not your money. Andrew Moran. That's
Milton Friedman. That's a Milton Friedman quote. It's an inefficient way to spend other people's money on somebody else. So Milton Friedman was turning in his grave when he read about the Indonesian story.
Well, thank you for talking Turkey with us, Andrew Moran.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be back in just a short moment talking the cryptocurrency collapse that's rocked over 1 million customers with Scott D. Cosenza. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The cryptocurrency markets are facing tough times as an enormous scheme unfolds. And yet, who was this Madoff-type mastermind behind it all? And does it beg questions regarding party political funding? Well, someone who's been following this story closely is Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, host of the Uprising podcast, and extremely dapper man about town, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza. Welcome back to the show, Scott.
And holder of at least one or more cryptocurrencies, though thankfully none on the the now bankrupted FTX Exchange, Mark.
Right. Just very quickly here now, Scott, I have to point out I'm incredibly ignorant on cryptocurrencies and the terms involved. FTX Exchange. This is essentially just a place where people can either use real money to buy cryptocurrencies, or they can use different cryptocurrencies.
The
to
notion that
purchase
there's
different
something called real
cryptocurrencies.
money and not real money, I think.
No, of course, yeah. I mean, take it as given that we understand it's all built on debt. Yes, yeah.
Government issued promises for our grandchildren
Sure.
to repay back. If that's
Sure.
what you mean by real money, then yes. So if you want to buy, for instance, Bitcoin is the most widely held cryptocurrency. How are you going to do it, though? You have to get somebody to sell you the coin, and it has to go into an account. And one of the most popular ways for people to do that is to take their government-issued money and transfer it to an exchange, which they can then use to buy Bitcoin in exchange for instance, U.S. dollars. So, and one of the important components of this story is that the FTX Exchange was located in the Bahamas, and many of the exchanges are located off U.S. shores. Now, some of that is just a natural occurrence because that's where their ownership is, and that's where they want to do business. But a large portion of the reason why so much of this is offshore is because of the failure of the U.S. regulatory authorities to allow our major financial institutions to do these things themselves, by the way, which would give the American people or any investor or depositor
an added layer of consumer protection.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Scott, so what's happened is essentially the chap behind it all, Samuel Bankman-Fried, he built up this enormous FTX company exchange, Bitcoin exchange, cryptocurrency exchange, and then spooked the markets. People started selling, and it's reminiscent of the scene in It's a Wonderful Life, right, where there's a Potter, evil old Potter, does a run on Jimmy Stewart's bank. Of course, in this scenario, Mr. Sam Bankman-Fried is certainly Jimmy Stewart. Let's be clear.
I'm going to go away from the Christmas movie analogies to just try to get everything straight. What happened was Bankman-Fried was playing games with the depositors' funds. As we understand it now, it looks like he took money he had no legal right to take to make bets on cryptocurrencies and other perhaps financial, investment strategies, hoping that they would pay off, and then he would be able to replace the money that he took, and no one would be the wiser. But that's not what happened. And in fact, somebody realized what was going on, likely, and that he was over leveraged. And that was one of the biggest competitors to the FTX Exchange, which is Binance, which is the world's largest cryptocurrency trading platform. And the Binance management said, we're going to dump a lot of the FTX proprietary coins that they held from basically a previous financial transaction they were involved with FTX. So they said, we don't like what's going on here with the balance sheets. We think it looks funny. And we also, it seems like, Mark, that the Binance people thought we could really pounce like a shark. There's some blood in the water here with some weakness with FTS. So they said, we're going to dump all of these tokens that we have, which is a sort of a proprietary type of cryptocurrency. And everybody rushed to sell because they realized the market was going to be flooded with these coins.
Yeah.
Because of that flood of the market, that was a run on the proprietary coin. Now, that didn't affect necessarily anybody else, except that in order to cover those redemptions,
withdrawals,
okay, FTX was placed in a financially precarious position. And so then people who had absolutely nothing to do with that proprietary coin, maybe they even just had dollars in an account on the FTX exchange waiting for an opportunity, or having sold or something like that, or a Bitcoin or any of a number of the other cryptocurrencies they traded, thought, I better get my money out of FTX before it shuts its doors completely. And they were right. And of course, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's a wonderful life. The scenario actually works. Now, Scott,
the reporting is that $6 billion was sold from the platform in 72 hours, by the way. That's the level of...
And I believe that more than 1 million depositors now have to try and claw back over $1 billion, that's a billion with a B, through bankruptcy courts. Now, I'm reminded, well, actually, a good friend of mine, Freddie Vatcher, who is a serious thinker and an even more serious chess player, he reminded me that this was similar to Robert Maxwell's big scam. Robert Maxwell may not be familiar to everybody, but he was a big newspaper proprietor in the UK and also the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, of Jeffrey Epstein fame. And what he did was shuffled money around trying to cover losses that he'd made in certain places, and essentially inflated his balance sheet until the whole thing came crumbling down. Now, what I think is really interesting, Scott, is that Mr. Sam Bankman-Fried, he was actually funneling tens of millions of dollars to the Democratic Party right before the election.
The second largest donor this cycle, second only to George Soros. He and his brother, who was a former staffer to a Democrat representative in the House and member of the banking committee, visited the White House numerous times. Mark, it's impossible to overstate how closely tied Sam Bankman-Fried is with the highest levels of the Democrat Party.
You should also mention here that Bankman-Fried's mother is also responsible for large fundraising organizations that specifically favor Democrats. Yes. This whole family is, as you say, deeply entwined with that. So what's happened? And now I do not understand how all these financing things work. Very few people, I'm sure, understand the full intricacies of it. But it appears that Mr. Bankman-Fried was getting lots of money out of the company and then giving it to Democrats just before the election. And now he can't cover that money by putting it from somewhere else within the company. And so the whole thing comes down. And the only people that are happy are the Democrats who were the happy victims of his largesse. Is that right?
Well, I don't know that we can say it's a 1-to-1, a dollar taken from here equals a dollar given over there. That I don't think the facts have yet to be reported that can justify such a claim. But it is true that he took money that didn't belong to him in order to make investments. And one of the outlets for what he did with his money was to generously fund the campaigns of progressive Democrats.
So do you think Joe Biden, in a fit of honesty, might decide to take his own checkbook out, or that of the Democrat Senate Committee's checkbook, and reimburse the up to 1 million victims of Mr. SBF, as he's known, fraud? Do you think that's likely to happen? A sternly
worded letter is in order, at least on that account. I look forward to reading it.
Scott, we all do. It should be the epic novel of a lifetime, explaining why they're not going to pay back the money that they used to get themselves elected to further their own political careers and indeed wealth building. Scott D. Cosenza, thank you ever so much for filling us in on this.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's almost all we have time for in this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank this week's guests, Tim Donner, Andrew Moran, and the long-suffering but always faithful contributor to our Talking Liberty segment, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, for joining us. And of course, my sincerest thanks to you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in. A parting thought for you this week on power. Plato once said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." And for me, this ties in well with what we see all around us. Those with the ultimate power over their fellow man seem determined to use it to bolster their own position and to ensure that the power stays with them. And then we have these tech wonderkins who use their position and their newly acquired power in assuring that the focus, attention, and indeed cash of the consumer is pushed towards those who are again already in power. But we should not be too dispirited, because we are, despite what the political left would have us believe, individuals with independent minds, spirits, and motivations. Really, against all the odds, there truly isn't anything more powerful than that. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone, hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner, joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors, deconstructing leftist narratives, debating the hot topics, and remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five.